How we feel about money impacts how we behave. There's a lot of feelings that come with retirement.
What are some tips for how they can better understand each other?
Try to understand them, not force them to agree with us. There aren't perfect answers for what to do.
All right. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Your Retirement Planning Simplified. Today, I am excited to have Dr. Meghaan Lurtz on the podcast. Meghaan is a professor of practice at Kansas State University, financial psychology researcher, partner at Shaping Wealth. She's also a contributor to Kitces.com, which is as a financial planner, one of my favorite websites. She speaks at financial planning conferences and is an expert in the intersection of money and behavior. So today we're going to be talking about what's beneath the numbers, how we think and feel and communicate about money in retirement. So Dr. Meghaan Lurtz, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Okay, well, I'm really excited to have you on. As I was telling you before we jumped on here, I read a lot of your stuff, specifically on the Kitces website. Kate, our associate advisor in here at Matthews & Associates, has also recently done a course with you, which she had great feedback. And before we even jump into the questions, could you tell our listeners a little bit about how you got started in financial psychology?
Yeah, it was kind of weird, I guess, as some origin stories begin, I suppose. I was working at a financial firm. I was working at a company called Total Rebalance Expert, and we helped advisors. It was software, so with the software helped to rebalance portfolios in a tax-efficient manner. And we'd be talking to advisors on the phone, and, sometimes they would call to rebalance the portfolio based on market timing and things like that. But a lot of times they would call and they were talking about how, they're going to redo the kitchen, or Bobby has to go back to rehab, or Sally crashed the car. And so there was all kinds of family conversations that I was having with some of these advisors, as we were kind of working through the portfolio and everything. And a couple months later, a year later, however long I worked there, I was at a TD Ameritrade conference, and I got to talking to these students at Texas Tech University. And their professor, Dr. Barry Mulholland, said, well, if you're interested in finance and, you're interested in relationships, there's programs out there like that. At the time, the big ones, which remain the big ones today, were Georgia's program at Kansas State, and the program at Texas Tech. And I ended up at the program at Kansas State, and I started in the master's program and just in financial therapy, and fell in love with it and decided to move forward with the PhD. So I kind of been around money and had lots of sort of funny money stories, I suppose, about families and whatnot. And I just found it infinitely interesting.
Okay, very cool. So maybe you could tell our listeners a little bit about why understanding financial behavior is probably just as important, if not more important, than just understanding the math around planning.
Yeah. I mean, how we feel about stuff, money, impacts how we behave. And in many ways, advisors know this. Everybody will know this, the minute that I say it, but it doesn't change the fact that it's really hard for people. Most of us don't grow up, in households where we see great money conversations. Money kind of tends to be like the thing with sex and politics and religion that you're not supposed to talk about. And so we don't often grow up learning how to have those conversations, practicing having those conversations, understanding how to make decisions, around some of those things. There's also the complicated part that for a lot of financial decisions, you kind of only hope to do it once, and so it's not like you get a lot of practice.
Sure.
And so there's just real value in being able to talk about how you feel, how you think, and how then both of those things have an impact on what you do. I don't know very many people that are motivated to do much, simply by looking at a graph. And I don't say that, negatively towards advisors. It's important to see graphs as well. But that is rarely, logic is rarely the reason why people do stuff.
Yeah, it's a really good point. In doing this for a while, we've seen so many scenarios where things look obvious in what you should do, but it just doesn't happen the way you want it to happen when you're giving advice, right? And so, part of what we do, part of the podcast too, is really just helping to start educate people to get people more comfortable around having these conversations and thinking about money, things like that. And then our process is all built around that too, where it's really breaking things down into really small steps and then helping us kind of identify where the maybe the bigger issues that aren't necessarily money related, but like kind of the hangups, right? This is a show for retirees or people approaching retirement. So what are some of the common emotional experiences that people are facing in retirement or as they're approaching retirement with their financial decision making?
A whole host of them. There's all kinds of things that people, I mean, there's jubilation and excitement, there's sort of that anticipation. Sometimes that's some anxiety, sometimes that is just more excitement. Then there's, actually retiring, and there can be some fear, there can be boredom. There can also, continue to be excitement. So I guess I should say, whatever you're feeling, it's totally normal.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of feelings that come with retirement. Retirement is difficult. It's actually one of the most common things that, whether it's students at university, whether it's the advisors that we work with at Shaping Wealth, whether it's people reaching out to me on LinkedIn, which, if you've ever found me on LinkedIn and you want to ask me something, I really do like it when people do that. So feel free to do that. But so common, something to this effect. I'm working with this person. They're, let's say, 65. They've got a few $1 million to $10 million in the bank. I have no concerns that they're going to run out of money based on, sort of what they tend to spend. And I'm trying to get them to spend more. How can I help? How can I do this? This is like one of the number one questions that people ask me. So if you're an advisor listening to this and you're thinking like, why can't they spend? I know that they're going to be okay. I'm telling them they're going to be okay. They are not enjoying things the way that they could. Or you're more on the client side of things and thinking, why is this so hard? I thought that this would be more fun. Both parties struggle here, and you're getting into questions of identity and the shifts in that, going from working person to a retired person. That changes our relationships. You had lots of relationships at work, maybe some you liked, maybe some you didn't like. You're not spending as much time with your partner. Now you're spending lots of time with your partner.
Sure.
Maybe it's too much, maybe it's not enough. You're not so much involved with these other people. Maybe you have friend groups, maybe you don't. Maybe you've gotten involved with hobbies, maybe you haven't. So there's all these kind of very interesting dynamics going on. And then there's also the fact that you have been taught to save and save and save and save. You have done everything that you possibly can for 45, 50, 65 years of life to save, 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 save. And now we are told to just turn that muscle off, and start spending. Like, that's really hard to do. Nobody likes to see the account balance go down, even though we're told it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's probably one of the biggest things that we run into for sure with clients who have made it into retirement. They know everything's okay, and they're still having that challenge to actually do it. Do you have any tips on helping people feel more comfortable and enjoying the retirement and spending more when they know they can?
Yeah, I have some. One, if you're not working with a financial advisor, find one. That will help you. Two, find friends, that are in retirement and travel with them. Sometimes it's easier to go as a group. It's hard to make, some of these big sweeping changes alone. And so I don't care if it's a hobby. I don't care if it's travel. I don't care if it's pickleball, whatever it is, find people that want to do it, and you'll be more likely to do it. We are community oriented. As humans, we are community oriented. And spending in ways where you get to do a thing and be with people typically makes people feel safer, makes people feel more comfortable. They enjoy it more. And so they're much more likely to do it. Other things that can help, again, it does really help to talk to a financial advisor and do some, scenario planning about, if I did this, then what's going to happen if this, and do some doomsday planning, get it out of your system, like run that thing into the ground and like see what it would really take. Go through, different pivots that you could make. Another thing that really, really helps is to do things incrementally. Again, it's a really weird day, the day that you turn off the savings muscle and, start flexing the spending muscle. And so spend a little extra for 3 months.
Okay.
Then go talk to your advisor or talk to your friend or talk to your partner, and then try it for 6 months. And then go talk to your friend or your partner and your advisor, probably all of them. And then try it for a year. You don't have to just turn it all on tomorrow. You can build up to this, because the fact of the matter is we are going to go through a market dip while you're in retirement. There will be something that happens where you're just like, dang it, I didn't see that expense coming, while you're in retirement. And those things don't feel awesome. But when you go through them and you work with a financial professional and you can pivot. Maybe you just spend a little less for a couple of months, or maybe you just simply change like whatever it was that you were like. There might be very small changes that you need to make, if you need to make any change at all, that can help right the ship if that's what we're truly concerned about. And so if we're just kind of experimenting along the way versus going full bore, that can certainly help people to build up that muscle in the exact same way that they built up their savings muscle.
Sure.
You didn't just start spending probably because you didn't have it, millions, hundreds and hundreds of dollars every month. You built up to that. And so you can think about your spending and trip planning and, redoing your kitchen or whatever it is you want to do. You can think about those things incrementally and think about those things involving other people. And both of those things help a lot.
Perfect. No, it's all great. Now, sometimes we run into the opposite problem as well, where it's the spending side of things. Where I notice this most is where, maybe someone got their wealth a lot quicker, their money a lot quicker. So maybe they sold a business, or maybe they had like retirement accounts through work they could never access. And now all of a sudden they can access them as they're retiring. And so there are these scenarios where our job is kind of the opposite. Instead of getting them to spend more, it's trying to help them kind of slow down a little bit. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
One, you can also do this incrementally. Two, these are never fun conversations to have. If you're having a really great time in retirement and your financial advisor comes along and says, well, maybe not so much fun, that it's not fun. That's not a great conversation to have, but they are really important conversations to have. So I recommend, as a financial advisor, I'm going to steal this from Carl Richards. He uses this line, but I think it's great, especially in conversations like this, where you say, look, you can fire me at the end of this conversation, but honestly, you should fire me if we didn't have this conversation. I need to have a serious conversation with you about your spending. And, would you be willing to do that? Saying it in more of a permission tone, and clients are going to go along with you and they're going to say, okay, you're saying this is important. I get it. We need to talk through this. And so then, really working from a place of agency, you may ask, so let's project this out, 10 years from today. What do you think is going to happen if we don't, curtail and make any changes? And when you ask that, be careful with tone and things like that. We don't want to come off as like, sometimes when my kids are getting in trouble and I'm like, really, is that really what you want to do? I'm doing the same thing, but your tone matters a lot. So be careful with your tone with that. But what you're trying to do is get them to talk and say, I know if I keep going down this road that we may get to a place where I'm choosing between a rock and a hard place. And I don't want that. I realize I have more optionality now. And so I'm willing to make some changes, but them talking about it versus you lecturing at them has a totally different effect. And then again, back to that idea of experimental language, that it's like, okay, what do you think we could start with? If we're trying to get to this, let's say lowering spending by $500 a month, where would you want to start? What if we started this month with 200? Where do you think where would that best come from? What could we do that isn't going to affect, your day-to-day living? And people will have, ideas. Like these are never super exciting conversations to have, but they are really important conversations to have. And as long as we demonstrate trust, demonstrate openness, try to actively engage them versus lecture them, these conversations tend to go a lot better.
Okay. No, that's great. Now, another one of the reasons why I see people spending maybe more money than they should be is comes to maybe financial support for their children or gifting money. So for example, maybe they got a little ahead of themselves and they gave one child $100,000 for a down payment. And now doing all their planning, they're realizing, if I do that for the other two kids, things are gonna be a little more difficult, but still feeling the need to do that, or just kids living at home, all those kind of things. Like how should people, and maybe there's probably not a one size fits all answer to this, but how should parents be thinking about those emotional considerations of gifting and financial support to kids?
So my hope is that you're working with a financial advisor. And if you were going to give $100,000 at some point, your advisor would say, hey, if you give $100,000 to this one, you might have to give $100,000 to the other three. And $400,000 is a lot different than $100,000. So this might impact the plan. So let's hope that we're talking about financial decisions, especially to that magnitude, proactively. These are not things that should be kept secret. These are not things that should, your advisor, if you're a client listening to this, isn't necessarily going to tell you no. It's your money. At the end of the day, it's your money. So it's not about telling you no. It's about figuring out the best way to do what you actually want to do. And that means you have to involve, your financial advisor in that conversation. So one, if you can, go at it proactively. Talk about what you want to do. Talk about why you want to do it. Because you may find simply in having that conversation that it broadens what's possible. It maybe the number changes, but what you do and how you do it and when you do it and look a little bit different. And that can be great in terms of taxes. That can be great in terms of timing. Advisors can be super helpful when it comes to the strategies of giving, beyond just knowing that you want to give. I suppose on the advisor side, again, with the recognition that this is their money. Yep. And so, what they want to do with it, is ultimately their decision. And so how can we create an environment that's open, where we can discuss different ideas without necessarily, shooting down ideas. There may be things that, we disagree with or think should be done a slightly different way, but there could be cultural considerations. There could just be emotional considerations. And it's not really our job to judge people for that. We're trying to help them do whatever it is that they want to do with their money. That being said, if it's a completely, like you can't work with this person based on what they want to do, then there needs to be just like a separation of the relationship for one reason or another. That probably got a little bit dark, but I don't know. Like, this is a tricky area. This is why financial psychology is so important. Right. And becoming a bigger and bigger part of, it's always been a very big part of financial planning. There's never been a time in which financial decisions weren't emotional or, had bound, like we're in the psychological space, just people ignored that part.
Yeah.
So it has never not been a big deal. It's just being taken more seriously at this point. Yeah. And so how we should react in situations like that and what we should do to support the client, but also give them their autonomy. In some ways, this is being worked out in real time. There aren't perfect answers for what to do. And so being proactive, as mentioned, is great. Having open dialogue with clients, that's really important. We do get into a situation, where we have to back out of something, if that's even possible, and or make a different plan going forward, the sooner you're able to bring it up, versus waiting until it blows up, is obviously the better option.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. So kind of maybe a good transition here is navigating money conversations with couples. So often couples will approach retirement differently or spending in general differently. What are some tips for how they can better understand each other?
There is a great book. It's called Fight Right. It was written by the Gottmans. The Gottmans are super famous couples researchers. This is not a book about money per se, but it is a book about fighting and how to do it effectively. So if you are in a relationship and talking about money is difficult, I promise you that just going to get this book and learning about some of the techniques will be really, really helpful for you in just learning how to talk about difficult things, money being one of those things. So recognize that there are resources even beyond your financial advisor. It may help you to reach out to, I'm going to recommend in this sense, an actual financial therapist as opposed to just any licensed marriage and family therapist, only because there's been a lot of research, or some research anyway, that therapists really don't like talking about money.
Yeah.
So find financial therapists because they actually are pretty comfortable with talking about money. And if you are having some money conflict with your partner, it can be great to talk to somebody who, that's their jam. They want to help you talk about that better. But yeah, you're also totally normal, like totally normal. My husband and I, we are married now. That at the time of the story, we were not. We had just bought an apartment in San Diego. It was the most money I had ever spent. And at the time, we were dating. We knew we were on the path to marriage, but we were dating at the time. And he goes, so I guess we should combine our accounts. And I remember feeling so angry. And I said, I will never combine my accounts with you. You will never control my money.
Right.
And he was like, what? Like, I don't know where this is coming from. And we don't have to get into it now, but certainly there were money stories, passed down to me, money beliefs passed down to me through my family, very different money stories being passed down and money beliefs being passed down to him. Now here we are making a huge financial decision together, and we have very different feelings about whether or not married couples should have combined accounts. And, there's no perfect answer. We grew up in different homes. And so sometimes I actually think it's less about, and I think that the Gottman book would back me up, it's less about agreeing, because sometimes agreeing can mean, especially in financial, we are taught a lot of times as kids, oh, just cooperate. And cooperate a lot of times means you're going to lose a little and I'm going to lose a little. Well, when it comes to money, we don't like to lose, like ever. And so cooperate in the money sense sometimes doesn't work, as much as we would want it to. And so in that vein, it's really important to understand over agreement. There are probably things that you are never going to agree on. To this day, my husband and I do not share a bank account. Does he understand, that why I'm like that and the crazy things that I think? And do I understand what I think is the crazy things that he thinks? We do. And so we don't fight about it. We have an understanding, but I can't necessarily say that we came to an agreement.
Sure.
I think a lot of times, especially financial, for some people, gifts mean love. For other people, gifts mean manipulation. For some people, they think, that they need this, that, and the other. And the other person grew up very different. And so they think they need this thing over here and not that. And there's not, again, I think we said in the very beginning that we don't have a lot of good examples of great money conversations that we get to watch as kids. And so then it's only normal that two people from two totally different backgrounds with two totally different ideas and thoughts being come together to ask to talk about something that they've never talked about before, let her seen, healthy conversations about. And there's a lot of emotions, at play. Yeah, that's like super hard. That's super hard. And so talking to your advisor can be great. I'm not saying that you shouldn't talk to your advisor about this. You can also talk to marriage and family therapists about this, especially those that have been trained in financial therapy. And then I'm going to just mention that there is a strategy. Everybody always thinks this name is really funny, but it was from the 60s. It's called nonviolent communication. It's used at the UN, so it's a legit way to have a conversation, and it works in 4 parts. First, we observe, then we talk about feelings, then we express our needs, then we make requests, reasonable requests. And so you may say, instead of saying, you always spend like that, because instead you'd say, I've noticed that when we're working on this is how the money gets spent. So we're just trying to observe. And you can go back to like early days of grade school. Yes, we are very actively using I statements here.
Yep.
And we're each trying to observe what's going on. Then you're going to express a feeling. So, I've noticed that when we're talking about this or we're buying things like this is what's happening. And that makes me feel stressed. That makes me feel upset. That makes me feel sad. So now we've expressed the feeling. Now we're going to talk about needs. I feel frustrated because I need more clarity, or I need more attention to the budget. Whatever it is, you're expressing your need. And so then you're going to make a request. Would you be willing to sit down once a month and we go over the expenses? It's something like that. Again, this approach to difficult conversations can be very helpful because we are trying to get to that place of understanding over trying to focus solely on making the other person agree with us. We have to accept that we're coming from two totally different lenses. And one of the best things that we can do, especially with people that we love, is try to understand them, not force them to agree with us. And you may find through going through this experience, the requests that you make to one another are completely doable. Now, is this going to make all the fighting go away and all the stress go away? No, but you will have a better way to communicate about it. And hopefully it will get easier with time. There's been a lot written on money dates. These are great. A good friend of mine, her name is Ashley Kwame. She's written about it. You can Google her. There's a lot. If you Google money dates, plenty of stuff will come up, and give it a try. Just have a time and a place where you're going to talk about a certain thing. Both of you let each other know, so we're not catching anybody off guard. Try to use some nonviolent communication and see how it goes. And at the end of the day, if you still need help, it's totally okay to still need help, and go talk to your financial advisor, go find a financial therapist.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of good stuff there. I'm going to look up the money dates for sure. I think I've heard that, but I've never actually looked into it. So we'll try that one out. And I also recommend the book Fight Right. My wife and I both read that. Super helpful.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great book.
Okay. Now, in digging kind of through that, so you actually, this is a question I had for you, is when we have these different money stories and beliefs and ways of handling things, so you guys keep your money separate. Like, have you seen systems that work better for people when they're on a different page when it comes to money? Like, does that make sense to just keep things separate? How do we bring that all together? And I might be getting more into the technical details too much for a podcast on the psychology of money, but just curious your thoughts.
Well, there has been some research on should you or shouldn't you combine finances? And without getting into all the different details of the few different studies that have been done, I can say pretty confidently that the best thing to do is the thing that makes you both feel safe.
Sure.
And, needing safety or, transparency or, whatever it is that you and your partner decide that you need, that is the more important thing to chase. And then these should be together or they shouldn't be together.
Right.
If you're in a relationship where your partner is looking every night at all the things that came through and they're asking you, interrogation style about them, well, maybe having separate accounts would be a good idea, because that doesn't feel very good.
Yeah.
Not that we want to create a situation of where there's a lack of transparency, but clearly there's not safety in that relationship if that sort of thing is going on, and certainly not healthy communication around money.
Right.
So I think it's more about, learning how to communicate, learning how to help each other feel safe, learning to create transparency, whatever that might look like for you, and learning how to have, good dialogue about money. There's no clear answer, but those things seem to matter quite a bit.
Okay. That's awesome. So shifting gears a little bit, let's talk a little bit about building healthier relationships with money in retirement. So maybe just to start, how can retirees better understand their own money behaviors or money stories and biases?
Yeah, actually a few things. I mean, apparently I'm into recommending books today, but there are some great books by Dr. Brad Klontz. His first book, I think, was called Mind Over Money. And he wrote another one not all that long ago that was called Money Mammoth. These books are wonderful. In some ways, they are some of the very first books within the space of financial therapy and financial psychology. And they are made for consumers. So, I mean, they are made for just average people. So you don't have to be somebody like me or a financial advisor to enjoy them. They are great books. And they help you to begin to look at this. What did I learn, from my family? What is, how does that make me feel? What did my partner learn, from, if you're going to read it together, learn from their family? So there are resources like that, 2 great books. Other great books, there's Morgan Housel's book, Brian Portnoy's book, Daniel Crosby's book. These are all books about money and our psychology. This has become a more popular topic, and you can find these books in airports, or order them, on Amazon. And I honestly think that there is a lot that comes out of just kind of doing some relatively easy, very enjoyable reading that can bring about some self-awareness. After you read this book, I would highly encourage you to talk to your partner, or maybe your brother or your mom, or, somebody that you care about. And then I would encourage you to talk to your financial advisor about it, because financial advisors do care about this stuff, and they want you to help you make great decisions and, feel good about your life. And so if you're reading this and recognizing, oh, that's why I've been doing that, and now that I recognize that, I don't think I want to do that anymore. Great. Go talk to your advisor about it. And I'm sure that there are ways that these new insights that you have, this new awareness that you have gained from just simply taking the time to learn a little bit about yourself will pay dividends, in terms of the decisions that you make. And the bigger thing is understanding why you're making those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. There's a lot of resources out today that maybe not so long ago weren't available. So everything you just mentioned there, we'll make sure we get that in the show notes to all our listeners. And also I'll link to our episodes with Daniel Crosby and Brian Portnoy. Okay. How would you define a healthy relationship with money, whether at retirement or, it doesn't really have to be retirement, just kind of at any point?
Intentional. That's what I think a healthy relationship with money looks like. Intentional.
Okay.
Where we are aware of what we're spending, we are aware of why we are spending it, and the hope being that it would be in the name of, well, one, paying your bills and things like that, just general financial well-being.
Sure.
But then also the achievement of general well-being. We know from research that, spending on experiences, so like taking everybody to the T-Swift concert, or going to, taking my whole family to Canada, going to go see BAMF or something like that. Those spending on experiences, especially experiences with people that we love, have an outsized impact on well-being. Another thing that actually makes people happier is to spend to not do stuff, which is underutilized. Everybody loves the idea. Like if you say, wouldn't you love it? If somebody, like I hate folding laundry and I really hate putting it away. So like if somebody just came to my house like 2 to 3 times a week, because I've got little kids, so there's like thousands of little pieces of clothes, and they were to just fold it and put it away, I would pay all the dollars in the world for that, because it makes me so mad to have to do it. Makes me crazy to have to do it. So everybody typically thinks that that's a good idea. And everybody has their own version, whether it's like, coming to chop the food or mowing the lawn, whatever it is. But only like 8% of people actually pay to outsource some of these things that make us bonkers. And I can tell you, I actually have a nanny that comes to my house every day, and she does put away my kids' clothes, and it is amazing. It is like the best money I have. It is a dream. It is the best thing. And so if there's, again, I assume people listening to this, you have a financial planner. If you have a financial planner, you likely have the money, to do small things like that for yourself, and it pays dividends. So spend money on your family and your friends, go do fun things with them, and then find those few things that just like drive you absolutely batty, and pay somebody else to come in and do those things, or buy the Roomba or whatever it is, it does all the vacuuming for you. I don't care. But those things are wonderful ways to, two sort of opposite sides of the coin, wonderful ways to spend money that actually lead to greater happiness and are, greater levels of general well-being, not just financial well-being, general well-being. You will feel better.
Okay.
That's awesome.
I love that. So just along that kind of same thought and being intentional, where do like values and money scripts come into play with all of this?
Sure. So money scripts, this is Brad's work, back to Brad Klontz. So if you were to read Mind Over Money, you will learn about money scripts. Money scripts are multi-generational messages that get passed down to us. Sometimes these are conscious, as in like, don't talk about money. Sometimes they are unconscious, as in, you always see your parents fight about money. And so you sort of grow up thinking people fight about money. And that maybe is true in some senses, but not true in all senses. Same thing about, okay, maybe it's not a good idea to talk to everybody about your money, but it's probably a really good idea to talk to like your CFP and your CPA and maybe an estate planner and probably your partner. So these are just like a script, in a play, and you're an actor and you're going to follow that script and you don't challenge it. That is the same way that money scripts work. And because they're subconscious, we don't challenge them. We just kind of move through life, believing that is true. And again, sometimes they are in a certain vein or in a certain way, and sometimes they are not. Sometimes they kept us safe when we were young and made things make sense, but now that we're older, no, and so it is really important to recognize what your scripts are. Which again, if you read that book, or you can certainly go, again, money scripts is something that you can Google. It's been written about in the New York Times. Brad has a website. You can actually go and take the test if you wish. Fair warning about the test is that it is built as a diagnostic tool. So there's no way to not have a money script. And all of the money scripts, or most of the money scripts, are negative in a sense. And so
Yeah.
just recognize if you go take it, you will get one. And this doesn't mean that anything is wrong. This doesn't mean that you're broken or anything like that. It doesn't mean that at all. I myself am both money avoidant and money vigilant. I've taken it many times and I'm always the same two things.
Okay.
And I'm fine. But again, you may see my money vigilance and in some ways my money avoidance, in my behavior with my husband and whether or not I will share a bank account. So it's totally real. It totally affects us, but it's just what you intend to do with it,
Right.
And so if you get the information back, my thought would be ask yourself, when is this true? When is this not true? When is this helpful? When is this not helpful? Where did I learn this? Asking yourself, getting curious, about like where these scripts came from. And of course, the impact that they have on your life can be really, really helpful. Money values is related. There's scripts which again, like sort of is historically in the way that we talk about it, tend to be negative, but they are money values, how we feel. It's still just another version of like how we feel and think about money. The interesting maybe thing about values, this actually comes from Daniel Crosby. I think that they did this research at Orion. But one of the things that they found, for example, or that he talks about, is that like when an account, like, so you set up an account and you say that this is the value or this is the reason, for this account and it's tied to a purpose. Now, people are 10 times less likely, 10 times, which is big in terms of statistics, 10 times less likely to mess with that account,
Okay.
like maybe the market does something weird. Okay, well, if there's purpose and value, we tend to be more patient. That's happens to be in effect. And even Brad, has seen that in some of his work. He and I, along with a bunch of other researchers, had a study where we had a double blind situation. And what that means is that in one group, and nobody knew what group they were in, which is where the double blind part comes in.
Yeah.
But one group they were just given like a general seminar on financial things, and the other group was also given that, but then they were also encouraged to talk about their values. They were also encouraged to talk about, their families. And that group that was encouraged to talk about those things, they not only saved more, they sustained it for longer periods of time. And so it's that same principle that when we can get to value, when we can get to purpose, when we can understand, those psychological triggers, positive and negative, we make better and different decisions.
Okay. Very awesome. Now, you mentioned kind of the role of financial planners and reaching out to your financial planner for different scenarios, right? So what should people expect from a financial planner, maybe beyond the numbers?
A lot. Financial advisors, I have done actually a lot of research on financial advisors, and I can tell you that they love to help. And I don't say that, if I had found the opposite, I would tell you, because I'm probably more consumer oriented, believe it or not, than I am financial advisor oriented. But advisors love to help. They love to solve problems. They love to support their clients. They truly enjoy and consider themselves a member of the helping profession. And so if you are going through something, maybe it's a new job, maybe it's retirement, maybe you're getting married, maybe you're getting a divorce, maybe you're having your first kid, maybe you just lost your mom and there has been some sort of financial transition, or you've just decided, I don't think I want to think about this stuff on my own anymore. I want to talk to somebody about it. Do it. I wrote something just the other day. I have a Substack and I was talking about self-help and how self-help is just a total myth. It's a total myth. And that it's not even healthy to believe in. And it's certainly not healthy to believe in when it comes to our money. We need to talk to other people. And talking to a professional that is a fiduciary, that has seen other examples, they're not you, but other examples of this strategy, other examples of this moment. They can be wonderful guides. They can be so supportive. And so I don't so much know that it's like, oh, you're going to walk in and your advisor is going to, ask you to sing Kumbaya and it's going to be like super woo woo or something like that. Or it's going to feel, like you're at a therapist's office. It's not going to feel like any of those things. But it is amazing the opportunity to be in a professional financial relationship and feel heard, feel seen, feel understood, have somebody that believes in you and cares about your success, not just financial, but, general. And having that person to talk to is a total game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Okay. So a lot of different things today, which is awesome. Before we wrap it up, and we'll find out where people can get in touch or follow along with your work. But I just want to know, if you had one piece of advice to give to somebody who's either just entering or just about to enter retirement, what would it be?
It would be talk to your advisor and, get support in that way. You may benefit from talking to a financial therapist as well, just, navigating the identity changes. But the biggest thing I would say is to realize that things can be done incrementally and, to experiment with spending a little bit more, or experiment with like trying pickleball. Maybe you decide that you hate it. Maybe you thought you were going to spend all this time in Europe. Well, pack a trip and go to Paris for 2 weeks and then come back and see how you feel about it. Experiment. That's actually how humans learn to do most things. And so if you are trying to figure out how to spend more and enjoy your retirement, then experiment with lots of different things. And hopefully you're experimenting with other people, in the sense of going to pickleball, taking a pottery class, taking up golf or playing more golf, spending time with your partner, and maybe engaging in the things that they like. If you've never done yoga before, but your partner does it all the time, go with them. I mean, you're going to be terrible at it. You'll hurt a lot the next day. You will probably laugh, and that will be the bigger thing. So finding people that you care about, cultivating community is one of the most important things.
Awesome. That's great. Man, I really appreciate you being on today. Could you just share with our listeners, where can they follow along with the research you're doing, or any other work, or how can they connect with you?
Sure. I can be found at Shaping Wealth, where we train advisors. I have a Substack where I write about, it's not necessarily for advisors, it's honestly for anybody, but I write about the intersection of money, psychology, philosophy, and emotions and relationships. And that's fun to do, a little bit more creative. If you are a financial advisor and you want to go back to school, you can find me at various universities, and I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn for any questions that you have.
That's awesome. And to our listeners, we'll have all that in the show notes, retirementplanningsimplified.ca. Just click on the blog tab and find Meghan's episode. So Meghan, really appreciate you coming on today. A lot of really good lessons and a lot of food for thought. So I think our listeners are going to enjoy that. So thanks a lot.
Cool. Thank you.